glad to talk about UCMR 5, the fifth Unregulated Contaminant Monitoring Rule from US EPA. And it's part of that Safe Drinking Water Act requirement that water systems go and collect samples over the course of a year, quarterly samples, and do so within a 3-year window. And every instance of UCMR 5, EPA puts forth which 30 contaminants are to be included. And so this time it's predominantly about PFAS. There's 29 different per and polyfluoroalkyl substances being monitored, and lithium, not to be forgotten. And this data release that just came out in the last week or so represents just the first glimpse of what those results are. So it's just a fraction of the water systems that will be required to report data. And it's, for the most part, just the first sample out of 4 quarters worth of data for those that happen to have started their data collection in the first year of the 3-year window from 2023 to 2025. So touching on who has to sample. So there are actually just over 10,000 public water systems that are expected to report UCMR 5 data, 10,498 if you believe the census at the beginning of this year. So that's every community water system and non-community, non-transient, non-community water system serving greater than 3,300 people. So for those serving greater than 10,000, those water systems pay for it on their own. Between 3,300 and 10,000 population serves, EPA is actually doing that. That was part of a bill passed, the OEA bill, a few years ago. And then for those systems serving fewer than 3,300 people, which is actually the vast majority of the numbers of water systems, there is a 800 count of those very small systems that are included. So just over 10,000 total. So when you think about how many systems have been reporting data, it's 2,282, which represents 21.7% of those that would be expected to report. And then if you think just about those that are reporting PFAS data, it's a little bit less than that. 2,193 have reported any PFAS data. Now, I will tell you, it's a little bit less than that, closer to 2,000 have reported most of the PFAS data. There's some differences between who reports what parameters and what, and that just speaks to the fact that this is the first initial glimpse of these data. As more and more data come in, we'll see more and more of a picture of that. Now, the key takeaways are really about how representative are these data of all the water systems that are out there. And the first thing is that it does seem to be pretty representative by system size. So across that spectrum of water systems that are expected to report, for the most part, we see pretty consistent percentages of water systems reporting. Where we still are delving into the details is actually by the type of water they use, whether it's surface water or groundwater. There are more nuances to that, whether they purchase water or if it's under the influence of groundwater under the influence of surface water. There seem to be some disparities there. And that's important as we consider, the implications for potential future regulations, because that's part of what the expected benefits and costs are driven from. And last is geographical differences. You think about it by state, and early returns suggest that some states have a greater proportion of their water systems reporting in this first data release than others, and we know of a number of reasons why that is. There are some states that have actually made recommendations for systems to wait to do their UCMR 5 sampling in, say, the second or third year because it coincides with some of their state regulatory efforts. So it's important to know that take these things with a grain of salt. Now, from the results that we have, again, there's 2,193 public water systems that have reported any PFAS data. There's 431, just shy of 20%, that are in 44 states, Puerto Rico and Navajo Nation, that have at least one or more detectable results of those 29 PFAS that have been monitored. And then you think about, well, of those 29, what are we finding? And there's actually 13 of those 29 PFAS for which we have any monitoring data have had at least one detection. That means 16 of those 29 have yet to have any detectable results from all of those samples that have been collected and reported so far. So going, top of the list down, the one that was detected in the most public water systems is PFPEA, one that's frankly not talked about that much. And there's some analytical reasons for why that is, and I suspect that will come out in the future. Then you ask the question about, well, what's the regulatory implication of this? How does this match what EPA put forth in their proposed regulation. And that gets you down to, well, who has PFOA, who has PFOS, and who has those compounds tied to the hazard index. And when you think about it in that way, there's 219 public water systems that have now reported data in this first release from UCMR 5 that have values exceeding what was proposed as the regulation from EPA. So that's PFOA or PFOS greater than 4 parts per trillion, and then the hazard index value greater than 1, which is comprised of PFHXS, PFPODA or Gen X, and then it's ammonium salt, PFNA, and PFBS. But the key thing there is out of those 219 from these data, which represents about 10% of the system's reporting data, only 6 of those are implicated by just the hazard index. All of the rest, the 213 remaining, are implicated by either PFOA or PFOS, or the combination of both. And so I do think that the UCMR 5 data are giving us really good information that, had it been available at the time of crafting the draft regulation, it might have led to some changes. And I hope that EPA will consider that, as it makes a big difference for how water utilities respond for public health protection, how we communicate to the public about what matters and what's important for their public health. And ultimately, we're going to keep tracking all these data as they keep being released and want to keep giving good updates to help inform the public, water utilities, policymakers, and obviously water quality data nerds like us that just wants to get into those details.